So hey anime fans. The series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Incredible. So let's start the series. A melancholy expression came on an old man's face as he thought about what to do next. Legendary Sanin found out of the formation of a new group that aimed to take over the entire planet just 1 month later. Their name was the Dangerous Clan, and they planned to gather all the Jinchuriki and harness their power for a reason Legendary Sanin had yet to discover. However, being the courageous man that he was, he immediately got to work figuring out how to stop these horrible men from achieving their goals. He was happy to say that he had found a seal that held the solution after searching the ruins of Yuzuno-kuni. This particular seal had the ability to take an object or person to a different dimension. Legendary Sanin could not have predicted what would happen on the other side or where anyone would end up, assuming they survived at all, in the event of a human. At any rate, the needs of a multitude of individuals eventually outweigh those of a single boy. Yes, he planned to use this particular spirit art on a young Naruto who had recently acquired the rank of Genin and learned how to use shadow clones. For the sage, it was a noteworthy achievement, but in this case it seemed futile. Though some of you might be asking how Legendary Sanin could have done this to his own godson or an innocent child, the solution is simple. In other words, Naruto had lived a wretched life, and Legendary Sanin knew that no matter what the young man did in the future, he would always be judged for who he was. Because he felt that this would give the child a second chance at life, Legendary Sanin was able to act with moral clarity. One that wasn't so excruciating and isolating that he barely knew what an embrace was. No, Legendary Sanin saw it as an act of kindness to provide his godson with a chance that no other human sacrifice had ever provided. To be extra safe, Legendary Sanin slipped behind the orange-clad 12-year-old using his transparent escape technique. He was pleased to see how well-trained the youngster was. The old wise man now realized that Naruto had probably used deception, the most important ninja weapon, for the majority of his life. The blonde's ability to trick both his sensei and the third headmaster was beyond Legendary Sanin's comprehension, but he was a little impressed by his godson's attempt to go from high ninja training to low jonin level chakra control skills. But since he had done nothing to deserve such pride, he quickly deleted it. He had left the child to fend for himself in a hostile village because he could not manage his vices. But now he would compensate by ambushing the unsuspecting preteen. His astonishment increased, but just before he could deliver the blow that would have rendered the child unconscious, he noticed a slight movement in the boy's shoulder, telling him that the boy had, in fact, been able to sense him while he was invisible. Legendary Sanin came to the conclusion that the child would have excelled, but this time, that would not be the case. But maybe in this new world. As he held the child as he fell backwards, he observed a lot of smoke rising from the neighboring woodland. Not being able to smell the burning, he thought. Odd. Given that he had a job to accomplish, he decided to disregard the circumstance. Cursing to himself how easy it was for him to do so, he started to remove the youngster from the hamlet and out of the view of bystanders. He would have to talk to his sensei after it was all over. He left the hamlet for an hour or two, found a cave, began writing the seal on the ground, dried it with his chakra, and placed the child in the center, lying down with his face toward the cave's roof. He then laid other scrolls that needed the boy's blood to unlock on his body. These scrolls, which would include autographed copies of each of his books, would provide the child all the information he was entitled to about his ancestry, including his father's favorite spirit art pieces and a few more that Legendary Sanin added to help his godson grow into a man. The old guy had been given the chance to spread his warped creations to another dimension, and he needed to give Naruto something to remember him by. Taking everything into account, Legendary Sanin was now prepared to begin the seal that would both send his godson to a new realm where he would hopefully lead a better life and protect the elemental countries from the threat posed by the Dangerous Clan. In fact, the fabled Sanin would now sacrifice one in order to save many, As the Toad Sage's chakra steadily flowed throughout the seal, illuminating the dark cave with a wide range of hues, legendary Sanin soon found himself struggling with the enormous amount of chakra needed for this method to succeed. However, he persisted, and the more he put into the seal, the more intense the light show it produced became. Nurda's body began to waver before legendary Sanin's eyes, fading in and out of existence. The light show quickly became so intense that legendary Sanin had to avert his eyes as he kept pumping chakra into the seal. The cave was rocked by an explosion shortly after, but it held up well, for which legendary Sanin would always be thankful after realizing that maybe he hadn't given it enough attention. But when the old man opened his eyes again, he was happy to see that Nurda's body had disappeared with the seal. He took a few more minutes to recuperate before heading back to Hyde Ninja Village to let his sensei know what he had done. Meanwhile, Nurda puzzled how someone could have sneaked up on him and knocked him unconscious, let alone send him here, when he woke up and discovered that he was in a sewer that he was already well familiar with. As he got closer to the bars in front of him, he yelled. He asked in an inquisitive, although slightly agitated tone, "Yo, fuzzball, what the hell's going on?" It must be acknowledged that Nurda did not like being manipulated. Instead, he allowed the man wearing the pink kimono to do it. The blonde heard a roar of resistance from behind the bars as a mountain-sized fox head emerged from the darkness, its menacing eyes aimed at the small child in front of it. Nurda showed that he was unfazed by the situation by merely grinning back at the demon, before answering in a deadpan manner. "You would dare to talk to the king of all demons in such a tone? I should rip your throat out. First of all, we both know that you're not even a demon, let alone the king of them. You are merely a hunk of chakra concentrated together to form an aggro fox who thinks he's all that. Second of all, we both know that even if you were to try and kill me, the seal would undoubtedly prevent it. Now, just what is happening to me that made it so I needed to be here?" QB, or Nine Fox as Nurda called him, merely snarled at the aggro fox comment before scowling angrily at the question. "It would seem your supposed godfather had returned to the village only to knock you out, take you to a cave roughly an hour or so outside of Hyde Ninja Village, where he finally set about resting you on top of an ancient Uzumaki seal with a letter from your mother and father along with your rightful heirlooms and a few spirit arts and techniques. He then decided like an idiot he would activate the seal in an attempt to send us to a different dimension." Nurda asked Nine Fox in a somewhat hopeful tone after a moment of disinterest. "And did it work?" The Otsutsuki god, also known as the Sage of Six Paths, was the first person Nine Fox had ever admired, but despite his pleasure, he decided to help the second. "Yes, it worked, but in doing so it did something that even I could not predict. The sheer forces acting on your body was too much for it to handle, and before I could manage to do anything it had already severely damaged your chakra pathways, meaning that while you can still use it for Tai spirit art like Rock Lee, you won't be able to use it for any spirit art outside of the occasional weak E or maybe D-rank spirit art, but even then it is risky." The nine-tailed chakra beast let that settle in briefly before carrying on with Nurda's nod. "Now normally I could just shot some of my chakra through, but unfortunately in order for us to even survive I had to have nearly all of my power stripped from me, as I now only have enough to survive, like some common civilian, sigh. But I did manage to give you one thing before I lost all my power." Now that he was interested, Nurda listened carefully to what the not-so-giant mass of chakra had to say. Nine Fox allowed the silence to continue again, letting a scowl creep across his lips in order to get even with the boy. And so he went on and on until he was positive the lad, still a bit childlike, had lost it all. "I managed to give you a sort of Kekkei Genkai that gives you control over everything to do with heat. What I mean by that is that you can control the heat around you, whether it be at the warmth of a sunny day or the heat of a molten furnace. You can control it through touch alone as long as it is hot, and who knows, maybe in the future once you gain more control you might be able to send it out in waves." Nine Fox grinned now that he was receiving a response. It had been very challenging to come up with it on the fly, and he had to admit that he was very happy with it. Additionally, he was aware that Naruto would be successful in this new world regardless of how powerful the people were if he trained it even half as frequently as he did spirit art in Hyde Ninja Village. So I'm pretty much the opposite of an Iceman, huh? Answered Naruto. Nine Fox just looked for a while in bewilderment before responding. All Naruto could do was shrug and add, I guess so, though I don't know what that's got to do with anything. I don't know, I just got a strange feeling that I'll be pissing off a snowman sometime soon. Nine Fox was even more confused by this before concluding that Naruto might safely return to his body. Fortunately, he awoke in a real sewer, where the water could truly leave stains on his clothing. After being swiftly dismissed, Naruto began to head outside for a ladder, but when he got to the top and opened the metal disc, he could only utter one word. Incredible. The metal buildings in front of the blonde were all taller than the headmaster tower. As he clambered out of the sewage hole, he got a few odd looks before everyone else just went about their everyday lives. Now he was on what looked like a walkway made of the same materials as the buildings around him. He returned the disc to its proper place and pondered himself what he should do next, as a familiar growling voice tore through his brain. Find a library or place of learning, and learn about this new world that we are in. He decided to heed the fox's counsel for once before trying to find a learning facility because he thought the argument had some merit. But it proved to be a difficult task because Naruto couldn't read any signs, and whenever he tried to ask someone a question, they would either ignore him or just stare at me like I was speaking a strange language or something. But that was before Naruto bumped into someone in a rush, and they both collapsed. When Naruto looked up, he saw a figure that looked almost like some of the villagers hiding in the clouds. He was around 6 feet tall, completely bald, and had black skin. The man was primarily concealed by a gray turtleneck long-sleeved sweater worn over a brown leather jacket. He had long black formal slacks that flowed down to pointy black leather shoes. Naruto found this man's outfit absurd in comparison to his own current wardrobe and what everyone else was wearing. He was willing to ignore that and not express his own opinions. The two got up and looked at one another for a minute before the black man said. The blonde boy stared at him blankly until Naruto decided to say something. Yo, I would normally start yelling about what the hell you were looking at, but seeing your current attire and state of dress, yeah, I'm not going to bother. Need some help? He was surprised when the old man gave him a frustrated look before answering in his mother tongue. Speak in a language I can understand, old man. Old man, I'm 32 years old, how the hell is that, old man? Normally, this would have prompted Naruto to say something more caustic, but he chose to ignore it once more because he needed to learn more about this world and this old man was currently his only source. He then began to inquire. How can you understand and talk back to me when no one else can? He asked, starting with the basics. Naruto sensed that the man in front of him didn't want to tell the child the truth because he appeared to clam up for a moment. To which Naruto replied, I learned Japanese in school. Feeling very lucky to have found that his mother tongue also existed in another dimension, he decided to appear naive for the moment by nodding his head in understanding. Naruto then requested advice from the nearest school. To his surprise, the man offered to both give him instructions and show him the way there, as it appeared that he was already in there. On the way there, the two made conversation and grew closer, sharing only the essential personal details. This man knew not to share all of his secrets with a stranger, despite the fact that he was a civilian, and Naruto can still sense chakra in other people. For this reason, Naruto came to the conclusion that he loved him. Naruto was able to discover, however, that he had a wife named Kana and that they lived in a supposedly nice apartment. He also learned that Bob was his best friend, that his name was Lucius Best, and that he loved winter sports like skiing and snowboarding. After giving Lucius his first name, Naruto explained that he was searching for a school because he was an orphan who loved gardening, learning new things, and playing practical jokes. Before long, the two arrived at the biggest library he had ever seen, which seemed surprisingly spacious for only the second library he had been to. However, 3 floors of books seemed like too many. The two went in together and asked the counter what kind of books they were looking for. He became rather upset when he couldn't comprehend what the man was asking for, so he ordered the man who had brought him to the library to ask the receptionist where he could obtain books that would help him learn how to write and speak English. The man's smile did precisely that, and Naruto got quite suspicious because he had never received such polite treatment before. Not even that clever old jerk of a headmaster treated him so well. He was willing to aid this man since he knew that he was oblivious of what he carried, but he would still take what he could. But he would continue to watch. Lucius felt bad about the orphan boy's alertness, and wondered about the kind of life the boy would have had to lead as he guided the child to a section devoted to language instruction. However, he would help this boy. He decided right then and there to help this boy stand as if he were his own. His status as a former superhero wasn't a coincidence. Additionally, he wanted to play a vital role in this boy's life as he thought that he was unusual. When they arrived to the moment where Naruto was hunting for the blonde, he expected Lucius would finally leave him to follow his own interests, but he was taken aback once more when he didn't. Before walking to a nearby open computer and changing his seat, the man had already previously gone about gathering the relevant literature. He then signaled for Naruto to obtain a chair and sit next to him. Although Naruto was now even more skeptical of the black guy, he took the decision to follow his advice, albeit warily and slowly. He would not leave anything to chance, even if he was positive he could beat the man. He sat down beside the man and asked, choosing to be a little more direct about his worries. After staring at the boy for some time, Lucius finally understood what he was saying. "Why are you doing all this? What is it you have to gain?" Before he could answer the boy's question, he began waving his arms in a conciliatory manner. For the moment, he decided to trust the man since he could see the honesty in his eyes, but now he had another question. "I have nothing to gain from this, nothing at all." The simple inquiry, "Then, why?" sent Lucius spinning, as he began to explain that his lack of self-awareness was the reason he was acting in this manner. But he soon realized his error and answered the blonde's question by saying. His words motivated Lucius, who began to think of a new career in television. Even if he didn't trust the man, he would still use him as a resource and take caution before Naruto's acceptance burst his bubble. "I don't really know. All I know is I see a child in trouble who needs help that I am able to provide." If he tried anything, the man would break out with all his strength. A few hours later, the two were tapped on the shoulder to let them know that the library would be closing. The two got up and walked out of the building, flushing a little in embarrassment. Now that it was 5 o'clock. It seemed that the two had spent most of the day there, and they had arrived at about 11 a.m. Naruto was surprised that he had spent so much time with someone who did not hate him. Even still, he had nowhere to stay the night, and it was getting late. He began to go away, but before he could take more than 2 steps, Lucius called out to him. Lucius was delighted with the boy's previous decision and felt terrible for him when he shook his head. "And where do you think you're going? Do you even have a roof for tonight?" inquired Lucius. "Then why don't you come home with me?" Naruto asked with a sly smile after a prolonged period of slack jaw. After stuttering for a moment, Lucius murmured something about young children who lack gratitude before smiling again at the boy in front of him. "And what'd your wife think, bringing home a complete stranger and a little boy at that?" "This is my decision, and besides, where else are you going to go?" Naruto nodded grudgingly, then turned back to the man and began to follow him to his new life, his new home. When they arrived at Lucius's flat, they were both startled to find it completely dark and empty. The two noticed that nothing seemed to have changed since Lucius left as they went around. Lucius was starting to get a bit concerned because there was nothing and no letter in the room they hadn't checked. She might have gone to bed at 5:30 in her bedroom, but that is improbable. A shiver ran up Lucius's spine as they both opened the door to see an empty bed. Then he noticed the rose petals that seemed to be strung in different places and the fragrant candles, which filled him with a sense of dread. There was a flush from the ensuite bathroom before the door opened to see Kana in lingerie. Before she knew who was at the door, she scratched her ass, burped, and walked to the king-sized bed. Now that he was speechless, Nerda thought about how lucky the man next to him was. Everyone wants a woman who can burp, don't they? In the next image, the blonde was still grinning as he saw the blood splatter from Lucius's nose as he ran back out of the room. Long into their relationship, he still seemed to lack self-control. Nerda thought, perverts exist in every dimension, and they are all just as funny. Before he burst out laughing again, only to be knocked down by an enraged-looking Kana. When Nerda woke, he closed his eyes and began to use all of his other sophisticated senses to pick up on any activity in the surrounding area. He immediately remembered why he had been knocked out in the first place, and had to stifle a smirk that attempted to appear on his face. That's when he heard it. Nerda remained motionless as Kana's comments struck a deep chord with him. What do you mean you want to adopt him? His heart would not allow it, even if his instincts told him to move as fast as possible. Nerda had always thought he had lost all hope up to this point, yet hope kept him precisely where he was. Nerda thought the feeling strange because he had never even thought about having a genuine family, even if he had ambitions of becoming a famous man. Unshed tears welled up at the thought of it. He required a father to aspire to and a mother to provide him with the feeling that he always had a home to return to. Not so loud, Kana, you might wake him and I haven't even told him about it yet, Lucius whispered in a voice Nerda had to struggle to hear. As a strange, wonderful sensation seemed to spread throughout the blonde's body, Nerda saw the hope beginning to grow within him. He pondered himself. Was this how it felt to be wanted? In what Nerda interpreted as a furious tone, Kana shot out. What do you mean he doesn't know yet? You brought him home for Christ's sake. Despite his confusion, Nerda listened to Lucius's statement and decided to think about it later. He merely thinks we are giving him a roof for the night. Besides, I always wanted a son, and since you can have one, why don't we just give this a try? He trembled a little at the end, or at least that's what Nerda believed, before he felt a change in the bed he was lying in as Lucius moved closer to his wife, hugging her and muttering soothing words. Kana's voice was angry and pouting as he said, I know that, and I've always wanted to be a mother, but it's just so sudden. Nerda finally started to allow his mind wander as he started to think about what all of this would mean for him. He kept asking himself if he should be honest with his parents, if this whole thing was still true. Should he tell them about his past? Wait a moment. He didn't think of the old pervert as his godfather, thus he had completely forgotten about the scrolls he had left him. Accordingly, he waited until both adults had left, plus a few more minutes, and then he opened his eyes to view one of the rooms he had passed on his way to find Kana with Lucius. Nerda thought it was a guest room because there was nothing inside, but it was still much nicer than any place he had ever lived, at least better than a trash can. He found 3 scrolls in his pockets after sitting up. The first one he picked was crimson and included the toad symbol. With 9 Fox's help, he unlocked it and spilled some of his blood on it. If 9 Fox hadn't insisted, he would have thrown it away as soon as he knew it belonged to the pervert hermit. Hi there, young one. You probably want to forget about this and move on, but I thought I should at least explain why I took you to a different dimension and why you were by yourself. First of all, I could have visited Hyde Ninja Village once a month or even brought you along if I had to keep up my spy network. Since a newborn should never be introduced in the types of places I frequent, I regret to tell you that the first option would not have been successful because of my vices. Furthermore, whenever I thought about it, I knew that my sensei would be taking good care of you at another brothel in town, so I never went back because of this vice. I now know that I was wrong, but I still can't go back in time, even though my sensei didn't know you were strong. Since a new group was forming and planned to use all of the Jinchuriki for an unidentified purpose, I sent you away. I therefore began to seek a way to prevent them, and in the ruins of Yuzuno Kuni I found that I could send you to another realm to save the elemental nations and give you another chance, with a guardian who, I hope, is not as hopeless as I am. I left you your mother's and father's spirit art that they had preserved for you, as well as a signed copy of each of my books and a few pieces of spirit art. It's the scroll with the Uzumaki crest on it. From the well-known Sannin. He was a little relieved to know why legendary Sannin had done what he had, but it didn't make him any less hateful of him. Nevertheless, he was grateful for the spirit paintings and was aware that legendary Sannin's debut novel was anticipated to be a success. After rolling the scroll up and putting it aside, he did the same with the one that had the Uzumaki swirl on it. Then, thinking that perhaps this was a sign from Kami about how screwed up his life is, he flipped to the last scroll, which had a burning orange color that made the preteen perspire. Nevertheless, he opened the scroll, and silent tears started streaming down his face as soon as he saw the first sentences. Dedicated to my little kid, Oda Kanoko. Even though it hurts me a lot that neither your father nor I will be present for you when you grow up, I know that you will succeed just as much as your father and I did before you, even as I write this with my final thoughts using a particular family spirit painting. We can only hope that the town will treat you fairly because we have left you everything we own. But, as a former container, I have my reservations since people are unable to look past their own hazed fury long enough to recognize your true self. Nevertheless, know that you have my undying affection and that I will always keep an eye on you from above. I can't write in this since your father committed his soul to the Shinigami to preserve the town, but I want you to know that he loved you deeply and hoped to raise his son to be a man we could both be proud of. In a separate scroll that is passed down from clan head to clan head of the Uzumaki clan, which you are now a part of, we have left you several pieces of spirit art, among other things. Farewell, my darling. From your Oka-san, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze, in case you were unaware. P.S. The fourth headmaster, Minato Namikaze, was your father. P.S. Don't forget to give me lots of grandchildren to spoil. Naruto was unable to contain his tears and let out a horrifying sob before continuing to bawl his eyes and making sure that none of them touched the letters from his Oka-san. He was too preoccupied with his own loss to notice the room's door opening as he kept crying, and Nine Fox understood that Kana had no malice in her heart as she approached the blonde. Naruto didn't notice her until she was virtually holding him. At this point, he turned to embrace the person who had entered the room, not caring who it was, as he looked for anything to console him at his difficult moment. When the blonde child gave her a hug, Kana felt a rush of happiness go up her spine. It took her a moment to realize what was happening, but then she realized how distraught the young boy was, so she decided to offer him the comfort he wanted by giving him a hug in return. Lucius entered the room during that scene and couldn't help but smile before leaving the two of them alone. Now he was pretty certain he was going to have a boy. Kana smiled down at the boy in her arms and felt him nod off before turning to see what the boy had been reading. She realized she didn't understand a word of it, but she assumed it was a letter from his parents or something because of how much the boy was crying. After folding up the scrolls and setting them aside, she turned and picked up Naruto, nestled him up, and put him beneath the blankets. She thought that perhaps she was ready to have a son, even though he was already 12, when she watched his smile as a result of her efforts. Naruto woke up the following morning to a perfume he had never encountered before, and it was lovely. He blushed at how weak he must have appeared after recalling what had transpired before he went to sleep, and then he frantically searched for his scrolls and final souvenirs of his family. When he discovered them on a shelf, He grinned before becoming frightened because he questioned whether Kana had read them. But he instantly discounted the concept because he was certain that she would have expelled him if that had been the case. The blonde, confused of what to do next, elected to follow his nose, which took him out of the room and down the corridor. He quickly came at a kitchen area that was linked to a dining room where Naruto could see Lucius and Kana seated. He lowered his head till his upper body was perpendicular to his legs as soon as the two turned to face him, and then he let out a cry. It wasn't too difficult for Kana to understand what the boy meant when he said, "Arigato for everything you have done for me, and I'm sorry for being the burden that I was." The two adults stood up from the table and gave Naruto a surprise family hug before they slowly walked away and motioned for him to follow them to the dining table, where a plate was already prepared for him. Only Lucius could fully comprehend what the youngster was saying. Since the youngster was naturally curious, he questioned what the food on that dish was, a stack of 6 pancakes with maple syrup, because he had never seen it before. Kana coughed just before he could reach in with his hands, and he observed that she was nodding her head towards something silver that was next to the dish. He put the 2 silver things in one hand, thinking they must be chopsticks, but soon discovered it wasn't functioning before he heard another cough, this time toward Lucius. After nodding his head in understanding, Naruto listened closely as Lucius used the spiky silver thing to pin the food down before he cut the pancake with the other silver thingy and ate the piece of food that was linked to the spiky silver thing. It seems that the older male was attempting to teach the blonde how to utilize the silver thingies. He began by putting his spiky silver item into the top pancake and then slowly pressing it all the way down, now that he knew how to use the alien object. Before either adult could correct him, the child scooped up all the pancakes and shoved them into his mouth. Kana was frightened and Lucius laughed a little, but it also showed that the youngster had been starved as a child because of his small size for his age, and they decided to address that as quickly as possible. The 3 of them instantly began to get to know each other better after that brief meeting, with Lucius acting as a translator. After learning that they both liked gardening, Kana decided to buy some plants for the windowsills. Lucius decided at that point to comply with Naruto's request and tell him the truth. At the critical moment, nobody dared to speak, and the dining room fell silent. Knowing what was going to happen, Lucius sighed and said, "Anyway, Naruto, me and Kana have talked it over and we were wondering if you would like to become our son?" Naruto then grinned deadly. "Okay." The boy's loud laughter was heard as Lucius fell out of his chair, anxiously attempting to make sense of what had happened. His own wife tried to cover her laughter with her hand. However, as he said, Lucius spoke up once more with a victorious smile. As Naruto processed what Lucius had just said, he stopped laughing entirely and then let out a cry for everyone to hear. "Yeah, well, we'll see who's laughing when I sign you up for school next month. Naruto best." Since it was decided that Naruto would be the newest member of the best family, the 3 had grown closer over the course of the month. Naruto was able to converse with Kana and rapidly took up the new language. He kept a noticeable accent and only had trouble with a few words. These 2 in particular had become fond of one another over the past month, as they realized how much they shared. In any event, the blonde had no trouble with domestic chores because he had been performing them all his life. The 30-year-old woman regularly requested him to help prepare supper, even though cooking was a relatively new interest of his. But the final straw was their decision to buy some flowers that the 2 would treasure over the next few weeks. Since the blonde and Lucius bonded via sports and exercise rather than through cooking, gardening, or housework, their experiences were entirely different. Naruto had learned about many of the sports that were played in this new planet, and he was happy with the ideas of most of them because they had never really existed in his old world, save from playing ninja, which kind of lost its value once you became one. The blonde's favorite sport was still baseball. Lucius's favorite sport was tennis, and Naruto was keen to master the game so he could join the school team and win over his adoptive father. Another improvement in their relationship was that the three had progressively started calling each other by nicknames. Lucius and Kana gave Naruto one of their own to accommodate his name-calling because he was not yet ready to call the two adults his mother or father. Naruto had nicknamed Lucius Kabu, according to his favorite baseball team. When they first met Naruto, Kana played Lingerie-chan. Furthermore, Kana's Naruto-kun and Lucius's Naruto-chan were chosen as Naruto's nicknames. When Lucius acquired the required documents to formally establish their relationship and shortly after, he registered Naruto for the upcoming term at school, where he would have started at the beginning of the previous semester. The month that the three of them had been together also proved to be productive. Naruto feigned sadness at the idea of going back to an academy like the one in his own world, but in reality, he was thrilled to meet kids his own age who weren't being told by their parents that he was a monster. Over the course of the month, Naruto had only ever spoken to his new adoptive parents in passing about his early years, yet they never pressed him since they thought he would ultimately tell them everything. However, due to everything that was new in his life, Naruto had little time for physical exercise. But Naruto had been learning about his new powers steadily, thanks to an agreement with Nine Fox that let him practice using his control over heat while he slept. He had found that he seemed to be able to heat things up with his existing abilities, but experiments to see if he could start a fire were challenging. It seemed that although Naruto could make fire by greatly heating the surrounding air, he was unable to control it after it had been created. He also understood that although he could generate heat, his body was vulnerable to it, and would still burn if the fire approached too closely. In order to use fire in combat, Naruto would seem to need to find some kind of fireproof clothing and gain a greater understanding of his own abilities. Thus, we arrive at Naruto's first day of school today. He was only glad they didn't make him wear a uniform, which Kabu had promised to do in a few more years. Naruto was able to grow to a respectable 5 feet for his age because of a nutritious diet. Now, Naruto had on a black long-sleeved sweatshirt hoodie with a burnt orange pattern that matched the black pattern on his stomach across the center of his chest. On the back of the aforementioned sweater, the red and black Uzumaki family symbol was nearly completely obscured. The preteen's burnt orange Converse sneakers were paired with black denim pants. That was a pretty hue, damn it. Rather than as a reminder of his home, he had maintained his Hittite around his arm as a souvenir of Irika, the only person from his previous life he would truly regret. He had turned the cloth black, so that from a distance it looked as if the metal piece was stitched into his shirt. Before being taken to school, he stepped out with Kabu, swinging his bag over his shoulder, to the car. He said his goodbyes, got out of the car, and headed toward the school's door after being instructed to meet with the principal first. He went up the steps and began to make his way around the campus, trying not to get lost as it was much bigger than the university he had visited before. At last he found the door to the principal's office, knocked 3 times, and waited. A few seconds later, he was told to go inside, and as soon as he opened the door, he was struck by how much it resembled the headmaster's office at Hyde Ninja Village. He noticed a man seated behind a big desk in the center of the room, looking as though he had aged for years, with a head of white hair on top of his wrinkly face. Naruto noticed a sincere smile on the man's face as he turned to face him. It was different from the fake one the third had plastered all over him, and the child was relieved. "You must be Naruto, how are you doing?" the old man asked softly. Before responding, Naruto merely shrugged. "I'm doing well, what about you, old man?" The elderly man replied with a loud laugh, adding that he was surprised that a student would dare to refer to him in that way. In the past, when they were among other people, he had urged the youngster to call him Mr. Henderson, and Naruto had already acknowledged that he liked the man. He was given a quick tour of the school by the man, and it was definitely a strange experience to be introduced to school life by the happy principal. Following the tour, Mr. Henderson guided Naruto to the classroom where he would spend the rest of the academic year. The two knocked on the door and were let inside room 13 prior to Naruto being introduced to the class. As Nerda took the platform, the principal exited the classroom. Class, we have a new student entering our classroom today, and I expect you to integrate him into our class with kindness and help him with his learning. Now, why don't you introduce yourself? One of the kids yelled. My name is Nerdu Uzumaki Best, and I will be your classmate until the end of this year. Nerdu was about to go pick a chair. Nerdu could see that the child had no interest in finding out more about him, and just wanted to take as much time off from work as possible. After his new teacher nodded and he noticed that Mr. Smith's name was printed in the upper right corner of the blackboard, he said, What about your likes and other stuff? He decided that he would use the identical format that the sixth headmaster had told him to use. My likes consist of baseball, gardening, and cooking. I dislike bullies, emos, and fangirls. My hobbies are gardening and pulling pranks, and my dreams for the future are currently unknown. The entire class was amazed at his command of English, and asked how long he had been studying it. Despite his unimpressive appearance, Nudu was easily recognized due to his Asian accent. Now Nudu needed to find a seat, and the only one he could find was next the woman at the back. She looked about 4 feet 6 inches tall, had the darkest blue hair Nudu had ever seen, and covered 1¼ of her eyes with long hair, making her seem moody, confident as a tortoise is swift, and very gangly in build. The girl's outgrown dark blue sweatshirt and dark blue slacks, as well as the lack of any other bright colors, further solidified Nudu's perceptions of her. Upon arriving at his seat, Nudu became enraged at the poorly disguised laughter and the phrases, "Poor you." Had he not just said that he opposed bullying? Being the good-natured person that he was, he cheerfully asked the girl if she would mind sitting next to him, and after getting a slight nod, he sat down next to her. When he turned on the class, he discovered that they were studying mathematics. Wow, what a buzzkill. After listening to the teacher talk for 5 more boring minutes, Nudu decided to perform a tiny prank to begin what would become an incredibly amazing story of the Western Heights Junior High prankster. He had planned to wait till a wet day, but he was bored and in need of a good laugh, so he took out his phone and pressed a button while grinning broadly. The class stopped what they were doing when there was a knock on the door, and the teacher went over to open it without suspicion. Nudu was surprised that the principal had allowed him to do this, and he even helped him set it up before they asked permission to enter. When the crazy old bugger said something about making the school more lively, Nudu wasn't really paying attention, and the classroom erupted in laughter as soon as he opened the door and saw a face covered in paint. But then Nudu heard an almost angelic laugh come from the seat behind him, and all the laughter was suddenly hushed. Although he found it difficult to believe at first, he finally decided that he liked the sound and would now make it a practice to look for it whenever he could. Even though Nudu didn't especially want this kind of memorable experience, he found class to be boring and nothing significant happened until lunch. During lunch, Nudu witnessed the girl he sat next to being tormented by 3 other girls behind a classroom. As the girl struggled to hold back her tears, he made the decision to step in and went over to hear the ladies insulting his backseat buddy. The 4 girls turned to face Nudu, who asked curiously, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" A girl with red hair raised her voice, and he thought the other female was probably in a different class with their year group because he recognized at least 2 of their faces from earlier in the morning. Nudu decided to pull a practical joke on the girl, who was obviously the group leader, saying, "We're just stating fact about how weird this girl is." The females hurriedly left after that, and Nudu went to check on them. "And I could express a fact by stating you have no soul, but you don't hear me saying things like that, do you? Scram now." "Are you okay?" he spoke in an anxious tone, dismissing the girl's fleeting body flutter as a trick of the light before hearing what she had to say. "Why?" was a simple question that took Nudu by surprise because he remembered asking Kubu the same question for the same reasons about a month before. He decided to ask it as his adoptive father had suggested. After a moment of the girl staring up at him, Nudu decided to speak again, saying, I don't really know, all I know is, I see an innocent girl in trouble that needs help that I am able to provide. By the way, you already know my name, but I still don't know yours. Care to inform me? The girl said, seeming extremely nervous as if she had never done this before. Violet's eyes glanced up into his deep blue ones as she said, but after a few moments of silence, Naruto flushed at what had been hidden until then, and she looked up into his eyes as her hair fell back over her ears. The voice was so low that Naruto almost missed the words. Violet! Violet Parr, even at this close range. Naruto rapidly regained his composure, then allowed a broad smile to grow across his face before speaking joyfully once more. It was Violet's turn to blush as the implications of what he had just said sunk home, but before she could stop herself, she reacted with a okay that startled both him and her. So then, Miss Parr, how would you like to become my first friend? Unfortunately, that was Naruto's last thrilling experience of the day because classes soon resumed and they were all discharged for the day. Lucius picked him up from school and drove him home without disclosing that he had already played a practical joke on his teacher. When he got home, Lingerie-chan gave him a catalog before she even asked. After giving it some thought, Naruto said to Kana, So, what kind of flowers do you want? Violets. Even though school can be boring at times, Naruto's time there has been amazing so far. He joined baseball on his second day and quickly made it to the top squad, where he was now a regular, hitting first and fielding at shortstop due to his quick speed. He also had a tendency to pull practical jokes, which made him very popular among the school, much to his dismay. After a few close calls, he had managed to evade detection thus far. Despite his fame, he had no real friends except Violet, though their relationship had been a little odd from the beginning. Naruto thought he might have seen her at a lot of his baseball games, but when he looked again, she was never there. He said, It could have been worse, he could have gotten fangirls, but it confused Naruto to no end and did him no good. Fortunately for him, it seemed that everyone was already enamored with another boy, Anthony Ridinger. The brown-haired boy seemed to have an all too familiar atmosphere of arrogance with him, so even though he was grateful for this, he didn't really get along with him. His studies were going well, and he had caught up to most of the class in the month he had been there, but his training had also advanced, and he had learned that he could put out other fire sources besides his own with sufficient concentration, even though he would still need some kind of suit to prevent burns to himself while using his talents. Using one of the fragrant candles that had been discarded when he first moved in with the best family, he began by concentrating on using his abilities to put out the flame. Recently, he had been successful in doing so, progressed to situations in his mindscape, and made enough progress to put out a barrel full of flame in less than a minute. Since he was too young to lift any weights, he had convinced his adoptive parents to let him join a local gym for physical training, and he spent at least an hour there each day, mostly running and staying in shape, which confused Naruto at first, but then he remembered all the times young ninjas had been injured while training with tough, experienced ninjas who had never fully recovered from their previous training sessions. Even so, Naruto took care to keep himself in top physical shape for baseball and his increasing ambition to violate the current law that forbade superheroes. During a subsequent visit to the library, he had learned of this law and was puzzled as to why someone would sue someone for saving his life, even if they no longer wanted it. When he asked Lucius about it, he was taken aback by Lucius's hesitant response. Later, Naruto would have to do more research, but the blonde's suspicions were only heightened when he chuckled and pointed out a superhero that looked like his adoptive father, and Lucius would cringe a little every time he heard the superhero's name, Frozone. However, he was preparing to go to dinner at Lucius's best friend's house on this Friday afternoon, and he was informed that the man, Bob, or something, has children of his own, so it shouldn't be too bad, provided they aren't arrogant jerks. Naruto did not argue with Lingerie-chan this time, even though he didn't see why he needed to dress up if they were just going to a friend's house for dinner, since he had been away more lately, and she had been taking care of his violets. He finished his outfit by wearing a burnt orange tie that Kana had made him wear. When he was ready, he walked in front of the mirror in his room, looked at himself, and smiled. Apart from his polished black dress shoes, he was dressed in black dress slacks held up by a belt and a black dress shirt with a burnt orange tie on the torso. He thought he looked very good, and his whiskered face added to the tough appearance. To Kana's dismay and Nuda's delight, however, his hair remained unruly, as she seemed unable to control it. He heard the door behind him open and turned to see Lucius smiling. "Once you're done staring at yourself in the mirror, would you kindly join your mother and me in the car?" Unable to suppress his laughter, Lucius just started laughing. Nuda flushed and then hurried after Lucius, complaining that he wasn't looking at himself in the mirror. When the two arrived at the car, Kana was waiting for them with a little furious expression on her face. Lucius unlocked the car and opened the door for his wife as they rushed to it, determined not to aggravate her any further. After dressing and getting ready, the three finally set out, going to a friend of Lucius's who, as Nuda had recently discovered, was the best man at the wedding of his adoptive parents. Since he still didn't know much about what he was getting into, he decided to ask Lucius and Kana about the family they were visiting. He found out that the mother's first name was Helen, that they had a baby boy, a 10-year-old son, and a girl his age. But what really surprised him was that when they pulled into the front driveway, he noticed that their last name was Parr, as in Violet Parr. Surely that must be a coincidence? A now somewhat nervous Nuda followed his adoptive parents to the front door of the house, and when the three knocked, the person Nuda thought was Helen immediately opened the door for them. What caught everyone off guard, however, was what happened next. It wasn't until Helen caught everyone's attention that the main spectacle took place. But as soon as the four of them walked into the living room, he saw Violet Parr sitting there with her back to him, and knew that this was indeed her house. Violet's shrill shriek of amazement at what her mother was doing drew everyone's attention, and then she vanished entirely, leaving a lamp and other pieces of furniture scattered about the room as the embarrassed girl ran in fear to her bed. Now everyone was just confused, wondering what had caused Violet to act this way, until Dash decided to be honest and say in a mocking way that it was because her crush was there. Nerd blushed a little, which only made everyone more confused. Sadly, Kana noticed and gave him a knowing look, giving him a sly smile that made the preteen blush even more before he calmed down. Goddammit, he was a warrior, and as far as he knew, warriors don't blush. Nevertheless, this had the opposite effect on Kana that he had hoped for, making her resist the urge to swoon, while her adopted son bravely tried to control his blush. Thankfully, no one else had noticed, because Nuda gave her a stern look. As everyone else began to piece things together, and realized that Dash could only be referring to him, it was not to be for the blonde. Helen tried to hold back her own squeals before excused herself to go talk to Violet about it, and it seemed that she had a similar reaction to Kana. Kana soon followed, leaving the room empty except for boys, and Nuda had to swallow because the strain was beginning to get to him. As he turned to face the man who must be Bob, he saw him look at him fiercely, but the child dismissed it because it was nothing he had never seen before. Dumbass move number one, Nuda thought to himself as Bob seemed to become even more angry that he could do such a thing. When Nuda turned to Lucius for help, he found him on the floor with Dash and Jack laughing freely. Sweat dropped from his brow at the three, but he realized that the infant was only acting that way because Dash and his adoptive father were also doing it. 5 excruciating minutes later, Kana and Helen came back with a very nervous Violet, her hair pulled down so that her face was completely hidden. They were completely taken aback. They sat down at the dining table that had been enlarged for the evening, and as Nuda didn't know either of the two families, they all introduced themselves, and from what Nuda could see, they were a good bunch of folks. At first, Dash seemed a bit unpleasant, but Nuda saw that the child was a natural comedian, and that earned him points in his book. Nerdo assumed the baby didn't know any different because he couldn't comprehend how Jack could be so happy all the time. Helen looked like a good person, judging by the glances she was giving him and Violet, so he knew he would have to be careful with her. Bob, on the other hand, seemed to glare at Nerdo for a full 2 minutes before introducing himself, as seriously as it sounded, because his wife was coughing. They decided that since the two seemed to already know each other, Violet wouldn't have to introduce herself. Since he could tell they were curious about the child the best family had adopted and their daughter/sister's obvious crush, Nerdo decided to introduce himself to them in the same way he had to the class. His unusual interests, dislikes, and pastimes shocked the Parr family, except for Violet, since they had never heard of them before and they all appeared different from what they had expected. "My likes consist of baseball, gardening, and cooking," he said. "I don't like fangirls, bullies, or emos. I enjoy gardening and pulling practical jokes, but I'm not sure what my future aspirations are." Dash was now grinning widely as he heard the blonde's next activities. The child seemed to be attracting Helen's attention more, and she looked to be repressing her interest. Bob was completely failing at keeping his frown on his face, and not seeming to be at all interested in the boy his daughter was supposedly smitten on. Then there was Jack, who simply sat there with a big smile on his face while he picked up his mashed food and tossed it back onto the plate in front of him, attempting to clap while the food flowed everywhere. Nerdo was beginning to feel quite nervous as he attempted to finish the food that had been prepared for him. Then Kana broke the uneasy tension that preceded his entrance, though at the time, Nerdo wished she hadn't. "So how did the two of you meet?" she asked, nodding to Violet despite the obviousness of the situation. Violet seemed to want to dig a hole and hide in it, which only made her head seem to sink deeper. If things continued this way, Nerdo might wind up joining her because everyone, including Jack, seemed to be completely focused on him. To make sure Nerdo understood, the blonde coughed into his hand before answering his adoptive mother in a low, nervous voice. When he responded, "We sit next to each other in class," everyone gazed at him incredulously. Violet quickly raised her head to look at Nerdo before quickly lowering it again. Sensing the girl's anxiety, he decided to quickly tie things up by telling a story about his first school lunch break. After Nerdo added, "It was at lunch break on the first day." Everyone listened and saw that Violet's head seemed to be pressing into the table. I instinctively approached the three girls harassing Violet behind a classroom and said, "What the hell are you doing?" I chose to play a practical joke by stating, "I could state facts by saying you have no soul, but you don't hear me saying things like that, do you?" To their response that we were merely presenting facts about how strange this girl is, before urging them to get out of there. When I inquired about her well-being, she responded, "Why? I don't really know. All I know is, I see an innocent girl in trouble that needs help that I am able to provide," I replied, recalling something Lucius had told me in response to a similar question I had posed to him when we first met. After that, Violet just stared at me. When I asked if she would be my friend, she said, "Yes." She seemed to pause before responding, then looked up at me and showed me her whole face for the first time. When Nerdo looked up after finishing, he noticed a variety of emotions and responses. Bob appeared to be at least somewhat appreciative of Nerdo, but when he first saw Lucius, he was looking down at him with a sense of fatherly pride, tears streaming down his cheeks as he realized that Nerdo had taken the man's words seriously. Bob looked angry as he thought someone was bullying one of his children. As they went through a list of persons they would invite to the wedding, Nerdo began to perspire once more, and both mothers were swooning over their relationship. Dash seemed grateful but was keeping it a secret because Nerdo was her younger brother. Once more, Jack was playing the game. Which meal can survive the thrashing the longest? But he was especially attracted to Violet, who must have become invisible and slipped away while the others had been engrossed in the story, and he decided to go and find out exactly where she had gone, of course without turning invisible. The blonde got away without anyone noticing and began searching for Violet, following his trail down a corridor he assumed led to the bedrooms, knocking softly on each door before opening it and soon realizing that she, or anyone, for that matter, was not in her room. After thinking about what he would do in his home, in Hyde Ninja Village whenever he was in a very bad mood, he decided to check the roof, and since he had seen the girl lost in stargazing so many times before, he was not surprised to see her when he finally found a way up, and he decided to lay down next to her to show his presence. At first, she was taken aback, wondering how her crush had found her. The girl asked, and for once, she decided to be tough during a disagreement. "How did you come across me?" For a few minutes, Naruto just continued to stare at her while Violet's cheeks progressively warmed up. Violet looked at him sympathetically as he answered, "Because this is exactly what I used to do whenever I felt down or troubled. Stargazing just seemed to take those problems away." Violet had a habit of doing the same thing whenever she was depressed for the same reason, but she didn't realize that Naruto, the happiest guy she had ever met, the one who always made people laugh and brighten their days, could be harsh on himself. She couldn't believe it and asked him. When she said, "How does one so joyful and strong ever feel down on himself?" Naruto just moaned. Since we are all fallible human beings, Violet, our character is shaped by how we learn from our mistakes. I enjoy cooking and gardening for the same reason you enjoy stargazing. It helps me forget about my past, my prison that I will carry with me until the day I die. I also utilize practical jokes and making other people feel better in order to feel better myself. Violet had a completely different view on Naruto now that she was aware of how much she still didn't know about him. She watched Naruto and realized that no one had it as great as she had previously thought, so she made plans to rectify that. Everyone has problems, and they had to deal with them. She decided to begin addressing hers that same evening. The straightforward question, "So Lucius, what was up with Violet when she turned invisible?" caused two passengers to gasp in shock throughout the drive home. Naruto decided to question his parents why Violet had been invisible at the start of their visit when he had finally calmed down enough to think straight following that episode at the Par's house. Naturally, Naruto already knew the reasoning behind it, since he had concluded that she must have skills similar to his own, but what puzzled him was that his adoptive parents had acted as though nothing was wrong, which led to a number of questions that Naruto could not answer at the time. But don't bother him if he wasn't going to try to find out. After pulling the car to the side of the road, Lucius talked to Naruto and looked over his shoulder.